I watched my daughter-in-law reach behind my father's wheelchair and unclip the battery pack, right there on the dance floor, in front of 250 guests. The chair rolled 2 feet and stopped dead, and my father, 81 years old, half his face still frozen from the stroke, pitched forward against the safety belt with a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. I got to him before anyone else moved. "Dad, I'm here. I've got you." Behind me, I heard her voice, light and easy, like she was commenting on the weather. "It just ran out of charge. These old models do that." Then my nephew Marcus was on his feet at the family table, his chair scraping back so hard it toppled. "I saw you unplug it, Vanessa. I was standing right there." The band stopped playing, and that's when my son, my own son, walked over, knelt down next to his grandfather, and said 4 words that changed everything that came after. "Grandpa, is it back?" Before I go further, I want to say thank you for being here with me tonight. If you're watching from your own kitchen table, your own porch, wherever you are, drop the name of your town in the comments. I read every single one of them. A quick note before we continue. This story blends real experience with fictional details for the sake of telling it properly, so any resemblance to specific people is coincidental. But I promise you the lesson underneath it is real, and it's one I paid for. My name doesn't matter as much as the 2 people sitting on either side of me at that reception did. My father, Walter, taught me how to lay brick when I was 11 years old, and he was still correcting my mortar lines when I was 42, right up until the stroke took the right side of his body and most of his speech 18 months ago. And my son, Ethan, 31 years old, was the reason I was even standing in that ballroom in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching him marry a woman named Vanessa Cole in a dress that cost more than my first truck. I should tell you the sound never leaves you. Not the string trio playing something soft near the terrace doors. Not the ice clinking in 250 glasses of champagne. Not the low buzzing hum of a room full of people who'd flown in from 6 states to watch my boy get married. None of that stayed with me. What stayed was the click of that battery clip releasing, the sudden lurch of the wheelchair losing power mid-roll, and my father's forehead catching against the safety strap because there was nothing left underneath him to hold him steady. I was 63 years old, and my knees still worked fine, but I went down onto that dance floor faster than I've moved in a decade. My dress pants soaking up spilled champagne from somewhere, and I didn't care. His eyes found mine first. That's the thing about my father since the stroke, people assume. Because his mouth doesn't always cooperate, his eyes have gone quiet too. They haven't. He looked right at me, scared, but present, fully present. And his left hand, the good one, grabbed my forearm and held on with a grip that still had 40 years of bricklaying in it. "I'm right here, Dad. Nobody's going anywhere." My voice came out cracked in a way I didn't recognize. Behind me, Vanessa was still talking, still smoothing it over for the room. "Batteries die. That's all this is. I don't know why everyone's staring." She said it with a little laugh at the end, like she expected the guests to laugh along with her and move on. Nobody laughed. Somewhere near the bar I heard a phone camera click, then 2 more, then what sounded like half the room reaching for their pockets at once. My sister-in-law's daughter, 26-year-old Priya, was already filming, her hand steady even though her voice shook when she said, quiet but clear, "That wasn't the battery." I watched her unclip it. That's when Ethan walked over. I want to be honest with you, in that moment, I thought my son was walking over to help me lift his grandfather back into position, to smooth the strap, to say something reassuring to the room. What he actually did was kneel down at eye level with his grandfather, take his good hand gently in both of his, and ask him, so soft only the 3 of us could really hear it, "Grandpa, is it back? Can you feel it?" And when my father managed a small nod, Ethan turned his head toward his new bride, and for the first time all evening, his face had nothing easy or celebratory left in it. "Vanessa, what did you just do?" She smiled at him the way you'd smile at a child, asking a question you didn't feel like answering honestly. "He was fine, Ethan. You're being dramatic in front of everyone." But to understand why my son's face changed the way it did, and why my father was on that dance floor at all instead of safely parked at the family table where I'd left him 20 minutes earlier, I have to take you back 9 weeks. To a Tuesday night in my kitchen in Mesa, and a credit card statement I almost didn't open. 9 weeks before that wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 11 at night, doing something I'd done on the second Tuesday of every month for going on 20 years, reconciling the household accounts, the same way my own father taught me, the same way I'd been managing things since Mom passed and Dad moved in with me after the stroke. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets after 10, the kind of quiet where you can hear the oxygen concentrator humming from Dad's room down the hall and the tick of the ceiling fan and not much else. I had a mug of coffee going cold next to my laptop and a legal pad covered in numbers that mostly lined up fine until they didn't. The first thing that stopped me was a $2,800 charge to something called Sunrise Mobility Solutions. I didn't recognize the vendor, and I hadn't authorized any equipment purchases that month. I'd bought Dad's current wheelchair myself, 11 months earlier, straight from the manufacturer, paid in full, $6,200, and I had the receipt in the accordion folder in my office closet, where I kept every piece of paper related to his care. I sat there staring at that charge for a long time before I picked up my phone and called my son. Ethan answered on the second ring, which at 11 at night should have told me something right away. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "I'm looking at the card statement," I said. "There's a charge from a company called Sunrise Mobility, $2,800. You know anything about that?" There was a pause. Not a long one, but the kind of pause that isn't really silence, it's someone choosing their next sentence carefully. "Oh, yeah. That's probably Vanessa. She's been helping coordinate some upgrades for Grandpa's chair. Made sense since she used to work in medical billing. She probably put it on the card we share for wedding stuff by mistake. I'll ask her to move it over." "He didn't need an upgrade, Ethan. His chair's less than a year old. I think it's something about the seat cushion, pressure relief, something like that. I'll check with her tomorrow." "Don't worry about it, Dad." His voice had that easy, reassuring tone he'd had since he was a boy, the tone that used to make me believe every excuse about broken curfews and dented fenders. I wanted to believe it now, too. That's the part that still bothers me the most, looking back. "I want it looked into by the weekend," I said. "Absolutely, no problem. Too smooth, too fast. Hey, it's late, you should get some rest. We've got the tasting with the caterer Saturday." I hung up and sat there a while longer, listening to the concentrator hum down the hallway, and then I looked back down at the statement. 2 lines below the Sunrise. Mobility charge was another one I hadn't caught the first pass. Through $1,950. Memo line reading, Companion Care Consulting. A merchant ID I'd never seen before in 20 years of running these numbers. I didn't know what a companion care consultant was. I hadn't hired one, hadn't discussed hiring one, hadn't seen a business card, a phone call, anything. I circled both charges twice in red pen and went to bed, and I did not sleep. I didn't call my daughter Renee that first night. She had her hands full 2 states away with her own kids, and I told myself I'd look into it quietly first, that it was probably a mix-up, a mislabeled vendor, something that would sort itself out once Ethan talked to Vanessa. I made Dad his oatmeal the next morning the way he likes it, with the cinnamon stirred in before the milk, not after, and I helped him through his stretching routine, the physical therapist's exercises for his right side, 12 reps, the same 12 reps every single morning since the stroke. He worked through them slower than he used to, jaw set with effort, and when he caught me watching too closely, he gave me that look, the one that means, "Stop hovering," and I made myself look away. Then I went back to the kitchen table and typed Sunrise Mobility Solutions into a search engine, the way you'd look up a restaurant. It took less than a second to load. There was no company, no website, no listing, no registered business address in the state of Arizona, just a dead end. I sat very still with my coffee going cold in my hands for the second morning in a row. Outside, a neighbor's sprinklers kicked on across the street, and somewhere a dog was barking at the mail truck. $2,800 to a company that didn't exist, on a card my son shared with the woman he was about to marry. My first instinct, and I'm not proud of this, but I'm telling you the truth because that's the only way this story is worth telling, was to find a reason it made sense. Because Vanessa was going to be my daughter-in-law in 6 weeks. Because my son loved her, and my son wasn't a fool, and 20 years of raising him had taught me that when something looks crooked, you check it twice before you tear the whole wall down. Maybe it was a billing error. Maybe the account number had gotten crossed with another client's. Maybe there was an explanation I hadn't thought of yet. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Ethan again. I called my daughter. Renee answered on the third ring, a little out of breath, the way she always is at 8 in the morning with two kids getting ready for school in the background. "Morning, Dad. Everything okay? Is Grandpa all right?" "Your grandfather's fine," I said. "He's doing his exercises." "Renee, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." There was a small shift in the quiet on her end, the sound of her stepping into another room, away from the noise. "Okay, what is it? Do you know anything about a company called Sunrise Mobility Solutions, or something called Companion Care Consulting?" The silence that followed had weight to it, different from the pause before it. "Dad," she said slowly, "why are you asking me that?" "Because there are charges on the card, almost $5,000 combined, and neither company exists when I search for them." 3 full seconds passed. I counted them, the way you count seconds during a thunderstorm to figure out how far off the lightning is. "Don't say anything to Ethan yet," she said, and her voice had dropped into something careful and controlled that I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager covering for a friend. "Don't touch the account. Don't confront Vanessa. Can you do that for me, just for a few days?" My chest went tight in a way I wasn't ready for. "You already knew something." "I've had a bad feeling for about a month," she said. "I didn't want to say anything until I had something solid." "But Dad, this..." She stopped, and I heard her take a breath, the kind you take when you're forcing yourself to stay level. "This might be bigger than a few $1,000s. I'm driving down this weekend, Saturday. Don't eat dinner before I get there." "Renee, how long have you been looking into this?" "About 3 weeks," she said. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want to worry you until I was sure." I looked across the kitchen toward the living room, where my father was working through his last set of arm raises in his chair. Slow, deliberate, jaw tight with the effort of it. He caught me watching and gave a small shake of his head, the universal signal for, "I'm fine. Stop looking at me like that." "Does your grandfather know anything?" I asked quietly. "I don't know," Renee said. "That's part of what I want to find out." Renee showed up that Saturday at 6:30 with takeout from the barbecue place on Main that my father used to love before the stroke made chewing brisket a 2-hour project, and a manila folder so thick a rubber band was the only thing holding it shut. She set the food on the counter and the folder on the table, and looked at me with an expression she'd had since she was 12 years old, organizing her science fair boards, calm on the surface, absolutely locked in underneath. "Sit down, Dad," she said. "This is going to take a while." My father was already at the table in his chair, positioned the way he always positioned himself, straight-backed, chin level, the posture of a man who spent 40 years running a crew and expected to be listened to even now, even with half his face still not fully cooperating. He watched Renee spread the papers across the table without blinking. "How long have you actually been working on this?" I asked. "Since early spring," she said, sorting papers into 3 neat piles with the same quick, practiced movements she'd used on her homework her whole life. "I noticed something off on a statement I was helping you organize after Grandpa's last hospital follow-up. A billing code that didn't match anything real. I didn't say anything because I wanted to be sure first." "Sure." My chest felt like there was a weight sitting on it. "Renee, that was months ago." "I know." She met my eyes without flinching. "I'm sorry. I needed to be certain before I brought it to you." She turned the first page toward me. It was the invoice for Dad's actual wheelchair, the one I'd bought and paid for in full 11 months earlier. Next to it, she laid a second document, an insurance reimbursement claim filed under Ethan's name, dated 3 weeks after the purchase, requesting compensation for equipment that had, according to the paperwork, cost 40% more than what I'd actually paid. "He filed for a higher amount than the real cost," Renee said. "I called the manufacturer directly last week. They confirmed the actual invoice total. Ethan knew what the real number was, Dad. He was standing right next to you when you wrote that check." "He knew," I repeated slowly. "And he filed the claim anyway, pocketed the difference." She pointed to the reimbursement line. "This is just the piece that was easy to find. It's not the whole picture." She moved to the second pile. I stared at the numbers marching down the page in neat columns, dates, amounts, vendor codes, and the longer I looked, the more clearly I could see the shape of something that had been building quietly for a long time. Small charges at first. $60 here, $90 there. Things that could pass for gas. A pharmacy run. An errand on the way to somewhere else. Nothing that would make a tired man stop and ask a question, especially a tired man spending most of his mental energy on medication schedules and physical therapy appointments, and learning how to help his father dress himself without making him feel like a burden. Vanessa had understood exactly how tired and distracted I was. She'd been counting on it. When did it start? I asked. My voice came out strange, flat, like a room with the furniture cleared out of it. About 14 months ago, Renee said. Small amounts, at first, right after Ethan started bringing her around more. Then in January, when they got engaged, she pointed to a line on the page. It jumped, almost tripled. My father's good hand came down on the table, not hard. He can't do hard on that side anymore, but deliberate. His eyes moved from the paper to Renee to me, and his jaw tightened in that particular way it does when he's working to form an expression his face doesn't make as easily as it used to. Dad, Renee said gently, leaning toward him. Did you know something was wrong? His good hand moved to the tablet mounted on his chair's tray, the one his speech therapist had helped set up months earlier for the days his words wouldn't come out right. His finger tapped out a single word, letter by letter, slow and deliberate. Yes, that single word landed somewhere behind my sternum. My eyes burned in a way I hadn't expected, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and stared at the ceiling for a second, because I was 63 years old, and I was not going to fall apart at my own kitchen table. Why didn't you tell me? I managed. His finger moved again, slower this time, TRIED. I reached across the table and covered his good hand with mine, and his fingers curled around two of my fingers and held on. Okay, I said, and my voice cracked wide open on the word, and I let it. Okay, we're going to fix this. Renee watched us both, her eyes bright, her jaw set hard. She drew a slow breath and squared the papers into a neat stack. There's more, she said, but it can wait until we eat. The barbecue went cold on the counter while Renee kept talking. By the time she pulled out the third stack of papers, what had started as one thick folder now covered every inch of the kitchen table: credit card statements, insurance forms, printouts from a business registry site I'd never visited in my life. Everything organized by date with colored tabs, the same system she'd used on every school project since she was in middle school. My father used to tease her about it, said she'd organize the air if you let her. Tonight, those colored tabs were the only reason any of it made sense. Start at the beginning, I said. All of it. She pulled the earliest page, dated 14 months back. It starts small, $60 labeled transportation reimbursement. Do you remember authorizing anything like that? I thought back 14 months. My father had just been discharged from his second inpatient rehab stay. I'd been sleeping 4 hours a night, learning how to work the hospital bed we'd rented, fielding calls from the insurance company, figuring out the home health aide rotation. Vanessa had been dating Ethan about 6 months by then, and she'd started coming around more, offering to help. Let me handle the insurance paperwork. You've got enough going on, she'd told me, sitting at this exact table with her laptop open. No, I said. I don't remember authorizing that. She ran it through as reimbursement for driving him to appointments, Renee said. Small enough not to trigger anything. Then 2 weeks later, another one. Then again and again. Over 8 months, she filed for 14 separate transportation reimbursements for trips that either you made yourself or the medical transport van handled. I pulled the transport service's own records. I cross-referenced every date. The kitchen felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. I looked at the neat columns in front of me and thought about how I'd handed Vanessa my insurance login one busy afternoon. Told her, "Thank you, sweetheart. I don't know what I'd do without the extra hands." How much total? I asked. Renee turned to the last page. She'd circled a number at the bottom in red pen. $97,000. The number sat on the page like something with actual weight to it. I read it 3 times. I looked up at Renee. I looked at my father, who was watching me with his jaw set and his eyes dry, and I understood from the steadiness of his gaze that this figure wasn't a surprise to him. He'd known. He'd been carrying it in a body that couldn't get it out fast enough, for longer than any of us had realized. When did it jump the most? I asked. January, Renee said, turning to the section marked with a red tab. The week after the engagement. It went from hundreds to thousands. Venue deposits, catering payments, a florist contract, all of it run through an account I didn't recognize at first. She slid a single page across the table. Coastline Family Services, LLC. I read the name twice. That's not a real business. Who set it up? Her brother, Renee said. Trevor Cole. Registered it 8 months ago. No physical address, no employees on record, no actual business activity. Just a bank account that receives transfers and pays vendors. It puts a layer of distance between the money and her. Trevor had been at my table for Thanksgiving. He'd eaten 2 helpings of my father's favorite pecan pie and told me how impressed he was with how I was handling everything with Dad, and I'd thanked him and meant every word of it. What do we do? I asked. Nothing tonight, Renee said, gathering the papers back into the folder with the same careful precision she'd used to lay them out. Tomorrow I'm calling an elder law attorney downtown, a woman named Patricia Nguyen. I've worked with her office before through the hospital. She'll know exactly how to move on this. She looked at me across the table. Dad, I need you to promise me something. Don't say anything to Ethan. Don't touch the account. Don't change any passwords. If they think we know, they'll start covering tracks. He's going to find out eventually, I said. Yes, Renee said, but we get to choose when. My father's hand moved on the table again. 2 sharp taps. His shorthand for, yes, for agreement, for I'm with you on this. I covered his hand with mine and held on. The forensic accounting came back the 2nd week of September. Patricia called on a Tuesday afternoon and read me the summary in her precise, unhurried voice. $97,000 moved out of our household accounts, and Dad's Veterans Benefits account, over 14 months, funneled through the Shell LLC, spent on wedding vendors, 4 weekend trips for Vanessa and her mother that had been labeled medical consulting, and a down payment on a car registered in Trevor's name. Every unauthorized transaction traced back to devices belonging to either Vanessa or her brother. The timestamps lined up exactly with hours I could prove, through home health aid logs and pharmacy pickup receipts, that I'd been at home with my father the entire time. We didn't say anything to Ethan. Patricia's advice was clear. Let the wedding happen. Let them believe they'd gotten away with it. And let the confrontation come from evidence too solid to talk their way around, in front of enough witnesses that nobody could quietly make it disappear afterward. It was the hardest 6 weeks of my life, sitting across the table from my son at Sunday dinners, watching him laugh with a woman I now knew had been draining his grandfather's care fund since before they were even engaged, and saying nothing. Which brings us back to that dance floor, and the sound of a battery clip releasing, and my son kneeling down in front of his grandfather asking, "Is it back? Can you feel it?" Because here is the part I hadn't told you yet. 2 days before the wedding, Renee had finally sat Ethan down with the folder, alone, without me, at her own kitchen table, 2 states away. She'd told me afterward that he went white, then silent, then asked to see every page twice. He didn't cancel the wedding. He told her he needed 48 hours to be sure the woman he loved hadn't been used just as badly as we had, that maybe Trevor had done this without her knowing. Renee let him have that hope. She didn't think it would survive the reception. It didn't survive the reception, because when Vanessa unclipped that battery pack in front of 250 people, my son wasn't asking his grandfather a simple medical question. He was asking him something else entirely, something we'd agreed on together 3 days earlier. A signal, a test disguised as tenderness. Is it back? Meaning, did she do this on purpose? Right here, right now, with everyone watching, the way she'd been doing it quietly for over a year. My father looked at his grandson, and with the working half of his face, he nodded, slow and certain. Ethan stood up. He turned to face Vanessa fully, and the room, which had gone half silent already, went completely still. "You've been stealing from my grandfather for over a year," he said, loud enough that it carried past the head table, past the dance floor, all the way to the terrace doors. $97,000, through your brother's fake company. And tonight, in front of everyone here, you knocked him out of his own wheelchair because he was in your way of getting to the microphone for your toast. Vanessa's face did something complicated. The easy performance she'd been running all evening, cracking at the edges. "Ethan, what are you talking about? You're embarrassing yourself." "I have every statement," Ethan said. "Every transaction, every timestamp. Renee showed me 2 days ago, and I have spent 48 hours praying it wasn't true." "It's true." A man I didn't recognize stood up near the back of the room, and I realized a moment later it was Trevor's own roommate. Someone Renee had quietly reached out to that week. Someone who'd apparently had his own doubts for months. "I told you this would catch up to you," he said to Trevor, who was already moving toward the exit, and two of the venue's security staff, who'd been briefed and positioned an hour earlier at Patricia's suggestion, stepped into his path before he made it 10 feet. Vanessa looked around the ballroom at 250 phones raised in the air, at her new husband's face closed off completely for the first time since I'd known him, at my father on the floor, still gripping my forearm, and she said the only true thing she said all night. "I need to sit down." "You can sit down at the police station," Ethan said. "They're already on their way." The paramedics reached my father 4 minutes later. His shoulder had taken some of the fall, bruised but not broken, and the imaging that night confirmed nothing worse than that. I rode in the ambulance with him, held his good hand the entire way, and somewhere around midnight, sitting in a hard plastic chair in the emergency room at Banner Health, I felt something in my chest that had been wound tight for 9 weeks finally start to loosen, just slightly. Trevor was arrested that night, charged before sunrise with felony exploitation of a vulnerable adult and financial fraud. Vanessa was charged 4 days later, once the forensic accounting was formally filed with the prosecutor's office, the same charges, plus conspiracy. Ethan filed for annulment within the week. He didn't hesitate, and he didn't ask me to soften it for him. The restitution hearing was in November. I wore the gray suit my father picked out for me the night before, tapping it twice on his tablet screen, his way of telling me it was the right one, and the conversation was over. We sat together in the front row of a courtroom that smelled like every courtroom does, old paper and burnt coffee, and when the judge called for a victim impact statement, I stood up, but I didn't go to the podium alone. I wheeled my father up beside me, and I held the single page he'd spent 3 sessions with his speech therapist composing, tapping it out one letter, one word at a time, more patience than I've managed for almost anything in my life. I read it out loud into a silent room. He hadn't written about the money. He'd written about what it felt like to watch someone steal from him while he sat there unable to say a single word fast enough to stop it. About the specific cruelty of being treated like his silence meant his mind had gone quiet too. When I finished, he reached for his tablet one more time, and the synthesized voice read his closing line into the courtroom. "I am not a burden. I am not a before and after story. I am Walter," and I was listening the entire time. My son made a sound beside me I'd never heard him make before. Something caught between his throat and his chest, and Renee reached over and took his hand without a word. 2 months later, on a Saturday evening in January, I made dinner. Nothing fancy. Pot roast, the way my father taught me 40 years ago. The kind of meal that takes all afternoon and fills the whole house with the smell of it. The table was set for 4. Renee drove in from Tucson with her kids asleep in the back seat by the time she arrived. Ethan showed up straight from his new apartment, the one he'd moved into with 2 suitcases and absolutely no forwarding address for anyone he used to call family by marriage. We didn't talk about the trial. We didn't talk about restitution schedules or Trevor's sentencing date or any of it, because there was nothing left that needed saying out loud. After dinner, while Renee's kids argued cheerfully over the last dinner roll, I watched my father. His eyes moved slowly around that table, his son, his granddaughter, his great-grandkids. Me and his expression settled into the one I know better than any other, the quiet, complete satisfaction of a man looking at something he built and finding it still standing. His finger moved across the tablet, and the synthesized voice spoke gently into the warm kitchen. "This is family." Ethan raised his glass. Renee raised hers. I reached over and covered my father's good hand with mine, and I raised my glass too. I'm not a man who talks about himself easily. I spent most of my life believing that keeping quiet and carrying the weight alone was what a son and a father were supposed to do. That belief nearly cost me everything I had left. If I could go back and say one thing to myself before that first unexplained charge, before the wedding, before the sound of my father's chair rolling to a stop on that dance floor, I'd say this: paying attention to the people you love is not the same thing as trusting them blindly. Check the statements. Ask the uncomfortable question. Don't hand anyone the keys to your family's life just because they sit at your table and call you dad. The most dangerous person is never a stranger. It's someone who knows exactly when you're too tired, too distracted, and too full of love to look closely. Don't let love make you blind. Let it make you careful. If this story reminded you of your own family, your own father, your own hard choice between keeping the peace and protecting the people you love, I want to hear about it. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know.